The piercing sound of the alert system cut through the quiet hum of the command ship, signaling that their mission was about to take a turn. Captain Kieran Thorne stood at the helm, eyes scanning the dark expanse of space ahead of him. His crew was ready. They'd been preparing for this strike for weeks. Reconnaissance, intelligence, and now, finally, the drop. He just didn't expect it to go this wrong, this fast. "Captain, we've got multiple signatures closing in fast," reported Lieutenant Anderson, his voice strained, almost panicked. The tactical screen lit up with red dots, enemy ships coming out of nowhere. Thorne's hands clenched around the armrests of his chair. "How many?" Anderson's fingers flew over the controls. "At least 24, maybe more. We weren't expecting this much resistance." Thorne exhaled sharply. The Wraithlords weren't supposed to have this level of reinforcements. They were supposed to be in the dark about the human strike on their research facility. That was the plan: attack, gather intel on their genetic experiments, and retreat before the Wraithlords could retaliate. But now they were surrounded, and retreat wasn't an option. "Get the shields up. Prepare for evasive maneuvers," Thorne commanded, his voice firm but laced with the weight of what was to come. "We'll get in, gather the data, and get out. No heroics. Just the mission." His second-in-command, Sergeant Lila Tran, was already at work. "Aye, Captain. Shielding at maximum. We're not going to be able to avoid a full-on firefight, though." Thorne's gaze fixed on the tactical map, his mind working through the variables. He knew the Wraithlords' tactics. Calculating, efficient, ruthless. They'd likely anticipated some kind of human intervention, but he hadn't expected them to mobilize this quickly. Either the Wraithlords had been monitoring their every move or, more likely, the humans had a mole in their ranks. "Admiral Kessler is gonna be furious about this," Lila muttered under her breath. Thorne shot her a look, but there was no time for a full response. "Right now, the only thing we need to focus on is getting that data. The Wraithlords are conducting genetic experiments on humans, hybrid soldiers, weapons. If we don't stop this, humanity is finished." As the ship jolted under the force of a blast, the lights in the command center flickered. Thorne felt the weight of the situation sink in. They were moments away from entering Wraithlord space, their heart of operations. Every corner of this facility was a risk, every move a gamble. If they didn't succeed now, humanity's chances for survival would diminish rapidly. "All crew to battle stations," Thorne said, standing to his feet. His team moved with purpose. This was what they had trained for: quick strikes, precise extractions, and intelligence gathering in hostile environments. But this mission was different. The ship shook as another blast hit their shields. Thorne gritted his teeth, trying to mask the tension that was building in his chest. No matter how well they prepared, no mission was foolproof. And the Wraithlords were playing for keeps. "Incoming wave," Anderson shouted from the comms station. "They're closing in from both sides. We won't be able to outrun them." Thorne's fingers hovered over the command console. He could feel the sweat starting to bead on his forehead, the pressure mounting with each second. They needed to get to the facility's docking bay and upload the data before their presence was discovered. If the Wraithlords realized what they were after, it could end with the entire team being wiped out. "Tran, prep the boarding team." "I'll take the lead," Thorne ordered. "Already on it, Captain," Lila replied. She and the rest of the team began to gather their gear. Thorne gritted his teeth, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the console as he considered their options. Escape was looking less likely with each passing second, and yet, they couldn't afford to fail. The lives of millions, no, billions, depended on the success of this mission. What he didn't tell them, what he hadn't told anyone, was that this mission could be the last chance humanity had to stop the Wraithlords from changing the very fabric of their DNA. The Wraithlords weren't just interested in conquering humanity, they were interested in rewriting their existence. Experimenting with their biology, creating hybrid warriors that could defeat anything the galaxy threw at them. If they succeeded, humanity would cease to exist as it had. They would become nothing more than fodder for the Wraithlord war machine. A sudden shudder ran through the ship, followed by a loud thud. "They're locking onto us, Captain!" Anderson shouted. We're taking fire! Hold steady! Thorne barked. We need that intel. Just as the command ship was jolted by another blast, a small, swift figure entered the room. It was Lieutenant Ramirez, her face grim as she approached Thorne. She was a sharp tactician, her eyes always calculating, always looking for angles. Captain, she said, her voice tight with urgency. We've been compromised. The Wraithlords know we're here. We need to change the plan, now. Thorne didn't even hesitate. What do you have? They've reprogrammed the facility's automated defense systems. If we try to dock as planned, we'll be trapped. We have to go in hot, force our way through the perimeter defenses. Thorne's heart pounded in his chest. This wasn't the plan they'd set out with, but there was no time left. If they were going to survive this, they would have to adapt on the fly. Get to the hangar bay, Thorne ordered. We'll board in full assault mode. Prepare the squad for immediate deployment. A cold sweat trickled down the back of his neck as he turned to face his team. Each one of them was ready, but the odds were growing slimmer. He knew there was a chance they wouldn't make it back, but that was the cost of this war. And he was prepared to pay it. The ship lurched as they breached the outer defenses, the alarms blaring louder, echoing through the hull. Thorne moved toward the hangar bay, his team falling into formation behind him. There would be no turning back now. They were in enemy territory. And the Wraithlords would stop at nothing to eliminate the human threat. The ship shuddered again, this time harder than before. The Wraithlord fleet had closed in on them. The countdown to impact had begun. Ready, Captain, Lila said, her voice calm as ever. Thorne turned to face the team, his expression grim. Let's make it count. The heavy blast doors of the hangar slid open, and the chaos of battle engulfed them. It was now or never. The sound of the ship's engines whining through the hull was barely audible over the pounding of Kieran Thorne's heart. The chaos of the landing had left his head spinning, but he couldn't afford to slow down. Not now, not with so much at stake. The Wraithlords were on the move, and humanity's fate rested on a handful of soldiers, including him. But now, with the ship touching down on the surface of the Wraithlord base, there was no more room for mistakes. Status report, Kieran growled as he adjusted his helmet, glancing at his team as they moved into position around him. Shields holding, Sergeant Lila Tran replied, her hands working quickly over her weapons console. But we've got incoming fire from the surface. A full force is waiting for us. Kieran's jaw tightened. It had been too quiet. This was no simple research facility. The Wraithlords had been preparing for this assault. They'd expected them. They'd known they were coming. Good, Kieran said, eyes scanning the battle map in front of him. The blueprints of the Wraithlord base flashed across his vision. They had to get to the central data vault, hidden deep underground, and extract whatever intel they could. But that was easier said than done. They had been betrayed. How the hell did they know we were coming? Kieran muttered, his hands gripping the controls tightly. The betrayal cut deep. There had to be a leak. One of their own had sold them out, and now they were walking into a trap. We need to move fast, Captain, Lieutenant Ramirez said, her voice clipped with tension. The longer we stay out here, the more time they have to reinforce. They'll be expecting us at the data vault. Kieran nodded, snapping into action. We're not waiting for them to come to us. We're going in. Full assault. The doors to the transport opened, revealing the harsh, alien landscape of the Wraithlord base. The terrain was barren, with jagged rocks scattered across a desolate plain. The base was nestled against a high ridge, its silhouette stark and imposing against the hazy sky. Kieran's eyes scanned the area, the hairs on the back of his neck standing up. Every instinct screamed that they were being watched, that they weren't alone. Move out! Kieran barked, his voice a low growl. The team filed out of the transport, weapons raised, scanning every angle. They had no choice but to push forward, to face whatever was waiting for them. Kieran's mind flashed to the hybrid soldiers the Wraithlords were creating, human-alien monstrosities with the power to wipe out entire fleets. That was their goal. To dominate humanity by stripping them of their identity, creating an army that would obliterate everything. As they approached the base's outer wall, Kieran's comm link crackled to life. "Captain, we've got trouble." Anderson's voice was tight. "The Wraithlord's main defenses are active. We're being locked out of the entrance." Kieran's gaze snapped to the high-tech doors before him. Automated security systems whirred to life, blocking the path forward. The sound of mechanical locks grinding echoed through the dead air. "Damn it!" Kieran muttered under his breath, frustration mounting. They didn't have time for this. "Ramirez, can you override the security?" Kieran asked, his voice edged with urgency. She stepped forward, fingers moving quickly across her console. "I can try. They've got advanced encryption, but I can get through it, just need a few seconds." Kieran stood back, watching the base like a predator watching its prey. He could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. There was no room for error. They had to succeed. If the Wraithlords learned what humanity was capable of, what they were hiding, there would be no escape. "What's the status on our backup?" Kieran asked, turning to Tran, his gaze flicking toward the sky. "Fleet's still in position, Captain," she said, her voice steady. "They're waiting for our signal to engage. But they're not going to wait forever." Kieran nodded grimly. The fleet could only hold so long. If they didn't get inside and retrieve the data, humanity would be stuck in a war they couldn't win. The Wraithlords would come for them. They'd wipe out their colonies, obliterate their cities. No one would be left to stand against them. Suddenly, a series of loud bangs echoed through the air, followed by the unmistakable sound of enemy fire. The ground shook beneath their feet as explosions sent plumes of dirt and debris into the air. "Ambush!" Kieran shouted, instincts kicking into overdrive. "Everyone down!" The team scattered as enemy Wraithlord soldiers emerged from hidden positions around the base. Their black armor gleamed in the dim light, their weapons blazing with deadly precision. Kieran's rifle roared to life as he took down 2 soldiers in quick succession, the shots perfectly aimed at their weak spots. But the Wraithlords were relentless. As Kieran scanned the battlefield, he saw more soldiers emerging from the shadows, more than they could handle. They were outnumbered. "Ramirez, how much longer?" Kieran shouted, ducking behind a rocky outcrop to avoid enemy fire. His heart raced as he watched his team engage the incoming wave of Wraithlord forces. "Almost there!" Ramirez shouted back, her hands a blur as she worked the override system. "Just a few more seconds, hang tight!" The air was thick with the crackle of gunfire and the shrill hiss of plasma rounds. Kieran's eyes were narrowed, his mind focused. He wasn't going to let them fail. Not now. Not when they were so close. With one final surge of effort, Ramirez's voice came through the comms. "Got it! We're in!" The massive doors of the Wraithlord base slid open with a loud hiss, the sound echoing through the battlefield. Kieran didn't hesitate. "Move, move, move!" he ordered, signaling his team to advance. The squad rushed forward, their footsteps pounding against the concrete floor of the base. They were in. But the battle was far from over. As they sprinted down the darkened hallways, Kieran's mind was a whirlwind. They had breached the facility, but they still had to reach the central data vault. And that meant facing more Wraithlord soldiers, more traps, and a ticking clock. Every second brought them closer to the Wraithlords discovering their true intentions. "Keep your heads on a swivel," Kieran muttered, his voice grim. "We're not safe yet." They reached the final corridor before the data vault, but what they found waiting for them was worse than anything Kieran had imagined. A dozen Wraithlord hybrids stood guard, hulking, monstrous figures with human-like features, but twisted, enhanced beyond recognition. Kieran's breath caught in his chest. These were the creatures the Wraithlords had been creating. And now, they were ready for battle. "Take them down!" Kieran shouted, launching himself into the fray. The final battle had begun. The corridor was bathed in a cold, fluorescent light, its sterile white glow reflecting off the polished metal floors. Captain Kieran Thorne led his squad forward, each step echoing through the silence, every muscle in his body on edge. The Wraithlord hybrid soldiers, the culmination of the enemy's twisted experiments, were only a few meters away. Thorne could hear their heavy footsteps, the low growl of their mechanical enhancements. He didn't have to turn to know his team was behind him, weapons drawn, tense and ready for what was to come. But there was no time to prepare for what lay ahead. A sudden roar shattered the stillness. Kieran was the first to react. He raised his rifle and fired. A Wraithlord hybrid, over 7 feet tall with muscled arms and glowing blue veins, crumpled to the ground, smoke rising from the impact point. The others surged forward like a wave of destruction, their movements unnervingly fast, despite their massive frames. Kieran's heart pounded as he dove for cover behind a steel pillar, a burst of plasma narrowly missing his head. "On my 6!" Kieran shouted to his team, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Take them down, now!" The first hybrid crashed into the pillar where Kieran had just been, its claws scraping against the metal. The force of the impact rattled the floor, but Kieran was already moving. He slid out from behind the pillar, firing a precise shot to the hybrid's head. It collapsed, but the sound of more footsteps confirmed their worst fear. This was only the beginning. Lila Tran moved next to him, her rifle spitting rounds as she covered him. "We've got to move forward," she shouted. "We can't let them delay us any longer." Kieran nodded, but the weight of their situation pressed heavily on him. They needed to get to the data vault, but every second they spent fighting these creatures was a second the Wraithlords were using to fortify their defenses. His mind raced. There had to be another way. His team was capable, but they were only human, and these hybrids were more than just machines. They were terrifyingly close to perfection. A sharp burst of plasma fire hit the wall just beside Kieran, snapping him back to reality. "Stay focused," he ordered, his voice more strained than he wanted it to be. "We push forward." The squad moved, their training kicking in. Ramirez was already ahead, darting from one pillar to the next, laying down cover fire as she reached the next intersection. They were close now. The data vault was just beyond this corridor, but the hybrids were relentless, more were coming. Kieran's pulse raced as he turned the corner, stepping into the large chamber where the vault was housed. The room was massive, metallic walls stretching upward, with data terminals scattered across the floor. A cold, sleek interface blinked in front of them, the only visible door leading to the vault itself. But just as they began to advance toward it, a chilling voice stopped them in their tracks. "You think you've won?" Therox's voice, smooth and deadly, echoed from hidden speakers. "You have no idea what you're up against, human." Kieran's gut twisted. He had been waiting for this moment, but the cold realization hit him all the same. They weren't just fighting an army, they were fighting for humanity's very existence. "We're not done yet, Therox," Kieran spat, glancing over at his team. "Not by a long shot." Therox's voice took on a mocking tone. "You think I don't know your plan? You think you can stop the hybrids? We've already succeeded. You're too late. Humanity will be erased." A shiver ran down Kieran's spine. "No," he said quietly, his voice steady but full of finality. "We'll stop you. And we'll take back everything you've stolen." The door to the vault began to open, but as it slid open, a surge of energy blasted from the center of the room. The air crackled with power, and Kieran was thrown backward, his body slamming into the floor with a painful thud. His vision blurred, the sound of his team's shouts distant and muffled. He struggled to regain his senses, but something cold gripped his chest. "Captain?" Lila shouted. He felt her hand on his shoulder, shaking him awake. "Captain, stay with us! We need you!" Kieran blinked and gasped for air, the pain in his ribs sharp but manageable. He turned his head to see Lila standing over him, the team forming a protective circle around him. The vault door was open now, revealing the heart of the Wraithlord base, a control room filled with data terminals and a massive central terminal, humming with alien energy. But it wasn't the data vault that had his attention. Inside the vault, suspended in stasis, were more of the human-alien hybrids, dozens of them, their forms frozen in suspended animation. He could see the grotesque blend of human and alien physiology, elongated limbs, unnatural musculature, and glowing veins running through their bodies. This wasn't just a weapon, this was an army of humans twisted into something else. His stomach turned. The Wraithlords hadn't just manipulated humanity's genetics, they had turned it into their weapon. They had created an army of hybrids, and they were ready to deploy. "We're not stopping here," Kieran said through gritted teeth, pushing himself up. "This ends now." He reached for his rifle, his hands shaking but steady. They had the intel. Now they had to destroy it. Kieran motioned for his team to fall in. "We take this base down. No survivors." But as the squad advanced into the vault room, the atmosphere grew heavy. The air was thick with the smell of chemicals and decay, and Kieran's heart raced as he thought of the countless human lives that had been altered, twisted, and lost. The hybrids before him, the very creatures they were up against, had been born from the suffering of his species. Just as he reached the central console, an explosion shook the room, the force of it sending him crashing into a nearby terminal. His vision blurred again, the world spinning around him. He managed to stay conscious, but it was getting harder to focus. The squad was scattered, some of them already engaged with the hybrid soldiers that were awakening from their stasis. Kieran's breath came in shallow gasps as he forced himself to his feet, his hand gripping the console. He could hear the sounds of battle raging around him, but he had one priority now: the destruction of the Wraithlord's work. "Captain?" Lila shouted from across the room. "We're outnumbered. We need to fall back." Kieran's eyes locked onto the control panel in front of him. His fingers danced across the keys, overriding the Wraithlord's systems as fast as he could. The countdown started. "We don't have time for that," Kieran said, his voice quiet but resolute. "We finish this here. Now." The countdown hit 0, and the facility trembled. "Fall back," Kieran shouted. "Now!" The Wraithlord base began to collapse, but the battle wasn't over. They had won this round, but the war, humanity's fight for survival, was far from finished. As the ship's engines roared to life, Kieran glanced back at the flaming wreckage behind them. The hybrids, the Wraithlords, they were just the beginning. The fight had just begun. And this time, humanity would not back down. The hull of the transport ship groaned as it ascended through the Wraithlord base's collapsing structure. Kieran Thorne gripped the console in front of him, eyes fixed on the dark expanse of space unfolding ahead. The explosions had left the base in ruins, the once imposing fortress now nothing more than a heap of wreckage. His team had barely made it out alive, but they had succeeded, at least, in part. They had secured the intel. They had taken down the hybrids, destroyed the heart of the Wraithlord's experiments. Or so they thought. But as the ship rose further from the surface, Kieran felt the weight of what was coming next. This was not a victory. This was the beginning of something much larger, much darker. The Wraithlords weren't going to stop. The war had only just begun. "Captain!" Lila's voice crackled through the comms, pulling Kieran from his thoughts. "We're getting reports from the fleet. They've detected movement, Wraithlord reinforcements, heading straight for us." Kieran's pulse quickened. He knew the Wraithlords would retaliate, but the scale of what they were facing hit him harder than he expected. He turned to face his team, their faces drawn, each of them bloodied but determined. This mission had cost them, but it had also shown them the full scale of the enemy they were up against. The stakes had never been higher. "We've got to make it to the fleet," Kieran said, his voice grim. "I need a full scan on that fleet, Lila. We can't afford to be caught off guard." Lila's fingers moved rapidly across her console. "Got it. Scanning now /" "Captain, it's worse than we thought. This isn't just a standard strike force. They've deployed an armada. They're trying to trap us. Any chance of outrunning them?" Kieran asked, his voice tight. "Not a chance," Lila replied. "They're already within range. If we don't make it back to the fleet in time, they'll pick us apart." Kieran swore under his breath. The transport ship was fast, but not fast enough to outrun the approaching Wraithlord armada. The only option left was to fight, to give the fleet time to regroup and prepare for the inevitable confrontation. "Prepare for battle," Kieran ordered, his voice steady. "Ramirez, get those weapons online. We're going to need everything we've got." Lieutenant Ramirez was already at her station, her face tense as she worked quickly. "Aye, Captain. Weapons are powered up. We're ready." But Kieran knew this wasn't going to be a simple fight. The Wraithlords didn't just fight to win, they fought to annihilate. And now, with their entire armada on the way, the outcome seemed more uncertain than ever. "We need to get this intel to the fleet," Kieran said, his voice low but determined. "We can't afford to let the Wraithlords know we've uncovered their true intentions." "Not yet." "Understood," Lila replied, her expression hardening as she looked out at the vastness of space ahead. "We're all in this, Captain. There's no turning back now." Kieran looked at his team. They were battle-worn, but their resolve was unshaken. They'd been through hell, but they'd made it out with something the Wraithlords desperately needed to keep hidden. The data they'd recovered wasn't just about hybrid soldiers. It was about understanding the full scope of the Wraithlords' plans. The war wasn't just about weapons anymore, it was about humanity's very survival. "Hold steady," Kieran ordered, his voice cutting through the tension in the cockpit. "We make it back to the fleet, we give them everything. And then we hit back." The transport ship shuddered as another blast shook it from behind, the Wraithlord forces drawing closer. The fleet was within reach, but they had no time to waste. Kieran's fingers gripped the console harder, his mind racing. This wasn't just a battle for the galaxy's future. It was a fight for every last human soul. The chaos of the battle was immediate. As the transport ship drew closer to the fleet's perimeter, a hail of plasma fire streaked past them, the deadly projectiles narrowly missing the ship's shields. Kieran could see the Wraithlord ships closing in, their sleek, dark forms like sharks circling their prey. The fleet was ready, but it wouldn't be enough. The Wraithlords had deployed their full force. This was going to be a slaughter unless they found a way to outsmart them. "Ramirez, I need that data uploaded to the fleet, now!" Kieran shouted, trying to keep his voice calm despite the tension mounting in the air. "Aye, Captain," Ramirez responded, her voice tight with concentration as she connected the encrypted data to the ship's communication system. But just as they prepared to send the vital information, a sudden jolt sent the ship lurching forward. Kieran's heart skipped a beat. The ship's lights flickered, and the power systems whined under the strain. "Report!" Kieran barked, his eyes scanning the control panels. Lila's voice came through, low but urgent. "They've jammed our communications. We can't send the data. We're cut off from the fleet." Kieran's jaw clenched. "They've been expecting this. We're surrounded," Lila added. "The Wraithlords have us in a trap. If we don't get that data to the fleet now, they won't know how to stop them." Kieran's mind raced. They had to act. They couldn't afford to let the Wraithlords win, but they also couldn't let their mission fail. Then it hit him. They didn't need to send the data through the ship's communication systems. They could deliver it manually, by docking with one of the fleet's ships. It would be risky, too risky, but it was the only option left. "We're going in. Get ready for a manual transfer." "We'll dock with the fleet," Kieran ordered. "Ramirez, Lila, get that data ready. We make this happen, no matter the cost." The crew sprang into action, preparing for the most dangerous maneuver they'd ever attempted. Kieran's fingers danced over the controls, guiding the transport ship through a hail of plasma fire. The Wraithlords were closing in on them, but the fleet was just in range. "Captain, the Wraithlords are locking on to us!" Anderson shouted from the rear of the ship. "We can't keep this up for much longer." But Kieran wasn't listening. His eyes were fixed on the distant fleet, the ships of humanity's last hope. He would get them there. He had to. With one last push, the transport ship docked with a larger fleet vessel, the ship's bulkhead locking into place with a resounding thud. Ramirez was already moving, the data secure in her hands. The mission was still possible. But just as the team moved to disembark, a loud explosion rattled the ship. Kieran's heart stopped. The Wraithlords weren't going to let them escape that easily. The ship's lights flickered, then went out completely, plunging them into darkness. "Move!" Kieran shouted, his voice hoarse. The final phase of the mission had begun. And there was no turning back now.